Good afternoon, everyone. I call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Ways and Means Committee to order. I'm Councilmember Abdi Warsame, the chair of the committee, and with me today are Council Members Cunningham, Johnson, Fletcher, and Palmisano. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum and are able to take up consideration of the city's business today. First, let's dispense with our consent agenda for the day. And today we have 22 items for our consent agenda. Item number 1 is a contract amendment with Urbit Inc. for the Underway impound lot. Item number 2 is a contract amendment with Northern Lines Contracting for the Eastside Storage Maintenance Facility Demolition Project. Item number 3 is a bid for Minneapolis Convention Center kitchen ductwork replacement. Item number 4 is a bid for high reach equipment. Item number 5 is a legal settlement for Christine Johnson. Item number 6 is the transfer of 2018 funds from the city's coordinator's office to the Community Planning and Economic Development Department for a workforce development assessment for the renewable electricity sector. Item number 7 is a contract with IRT Consulting Group Ltd. for the solid waste information systems. Item number 8 is a contract with the same organization, IRT, Accenture, and Integridum for ServiceNow projects. Item number 9 is a master contract with the University of Minnesota for research services and real estate access. Item number 10 is a contract with DRT Benefits, benefits for COBRA administration and varied other compliance and benefit services. Item number 11 is 2018 Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS request for proposal. Item number 12 is a Minnesota Housing Lender Participation Agreement for Minnesota Housing Home Improvement Loan Program. Item number 13 is a Park 7 Apartments Affordable Housing Trust Fund reward. Item number 14 is a bid for Upton Vincent and 51st Avenue North Sanitary Sewer Replacement Project. Item number 15 is a bid for construction of Americans with Disabilities Act pedestrian ramps. Item number 16 is 34th Street South Street Reconstruction Project, project approval assessment and areaway abandonment. Item number 17 is a contract with Alliance for Sustainability for Litter Be Gone event services. Item number 18 is a contract with Progressive Rail Inc. for 61st Street West Street Reconstruction Project. Item number 19 is a contract with CHA Consulting Inc. for Railroad Crossing geotechnical review on the 61st Street West Street Reconstruction Project. Item number 20 is a grant application through 2018 Metropolitan Council Regional Solicitation Program for Federal Transportation Funds. Item number 21 is a bid for Girard Avenue South Sanitary Sewer Replacement Project. Item number 22 is an agreement with Xcel Energy to purchase renewable electricity from the Renewable Connect program. And those are the 22 items that I have on the consent agenda. And any discussions on the consent agenda? Okay, I'll make approval I'll make a motion to approve the consent items. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say nay. Well, those items have been approved. And now let's move to our discussion item, which is item number 23. And this is the Downtown East project, Ryan Company's debt service payment and Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, MSFA parking ramp performance report. And we have, can you state your name, sir? Sorry.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm Mark Winkelake, the Director of Development Finance.
All right, thank you, Mr. Winkelake. And go ahead, please.
As many of you may recall, back in February of 2014, the city entered into a development agreement with Ryan Companies and the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, the MSFA, for the redevelopment of a 5-block area known as the Downtown East Project. This area is located just west of US Bank Stadium. Since that time, development in the project has included the Commons Park, 2 office towers occupied by Wells Fargo, rental housing known as The Addition, the Radisson Red Hotel, and the Millwright Office Building. Pursuant to the development agreement, in March of 2014, the city issued approximately $64 million in taxable general obligation bonds. Proceeds of those bonds were used for land acquisition for the commons, basic construction costs of the commons, A large portion of the construction of what's known as the Mills Fleet Farm ramp, that's the above ground ramp that's attached by Skyway to the stadium, other site costs, and financing costs. The debt service on the bonds is payable from two sources. The first source is payments that Ryan makes to the city on January 15th each year to cover debt service. Those payments are made, were made starting January 15th of 2017, and they will continue until the later of January 15th, 2016, which would be 10 years, or the point in which the combined net operating income of the two ramps, which is not only the Mills Fleet Farm ramp, but the underground parking garage across the street that's under the US Bank LRT station, when the combined NOI of those two ramps exceeds $4 million. So it's one of those two triggers. Right now we're projecting that we'll hit the 10-year trigger first, and so the last payment will be made in 2026. After that point, the second source of payment on the bonds is payments that the MSFA will make to the city on a semi-annual basis out of the operating funds of the two ramps, and those are projected to be sufficient to pay for the bond issue thereafter. If for any reason there is insufficient money in that particular account, the city would pick up the shortfall, and then later on, as there's excess net operating income from the two ramps, the city would be repaid with interest. On January 15th of this year, Ryan made the required payment of $2,980,000. Next year, that will bump up to $3,240,000, and it increases slightly every year through the 10-year period. Ryan is currently responsible for managing the operation of these two ramps. And for calendar 2017, the combined net operating income of the two ramps was approximately $2.87 million. For 2018, the budgeted amount of combined NOI is approximately $4 million, a little bit over that. So right now, the two ramps are operating a little bit better than projected, which is good. That's what we want, those ramps to continue to be profitable. City is protected through the Ryan payments for, like I say, for the first 10 years, and then after that, we'll be relying on the net operating income from those two ramps. Mr. Chair, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukareg. Any questions from my colleagues? Okay. All right. So how long is it 30 years? Or is it?
The bond issue goes out through, the last payment on the bonds is March 1st, 2044. So
about 30 years. Okay, thank you very much. Any further discussion on this item? Okay. Seeing none, I move to receive and file this item. All in approval say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Okay, that motion passes. And we have item number 24, which is the Super Bowl activity and event revenues. Receiving and filing a report providing an estimate of the incremental revenues related to Minneapolis local taxes and other revenues that resulted from the Super Bowl and the related activities and events in the 10-day period leading up to the NFL championship. And we have our CFO, Mr. Mark Ruff, to make the presentation.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mark Ruff. I will be brief in an introduction, then be turning it over to John Wirtjes from Public Works, and then after John will be Jeff Johnson from the Convention Center to give different perspective on what happened with the Super Bowl. I would expect that this will probably be the last presentation on the Super Bowl that we'll have at the city, but it is in response to questions that council members and others have brought forth to us, which is not only what kind of expenses did we have during this event, but what type of revenues did we have. And certainly, if you have questions on expenses, we have Brittany Allen and Pat Bourne, who were deeply involved in this process all the way through, who can respond to questions. But as you recall, there was a report back to the council, I believe it was the Enterprise Committee, the end of March, where we talked about the reimbursements from the host committee that went up to approximately $7.5 million. The majority of those costs were overtime costs for our staff and for other public safety departments that helped us during that period of time. But there were actually a couple of other reimbursements, which were not just for expenses, but were actually more like payments to the city that were according to a fee schedule. And some of that actually brought some net revenue that we'll be talking through as well to the city, in addition to the sales tax, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. I will also mention that not directly from the host committee, but certainly for events that took place during the January and February timeframe of 2018, we also had a slight increase in some of our business license fees. The last that I saw was first quarter of 2018, we're about $200,000 higher on business licenses related to food and liquor than 2017. It's pretty difficult, given the large volume of those licenses, to go in and try to actually parse out which ones were directly related to a Super Bowl event. Quite honestly, we didn't take the time to go through that, but I just want to lay out there that there are several areas where revenues were higher than previous years, and that's one. Clearly, we have increased expenses every time there is a liquor license or a food license that is brought in as well, and so we expect that those are largely offsetting, but it was a net positive from the previous year. Just a brief overview again on the city's local sales and entertainment taxes. So we have 5 of them. There is the 0.5% general sales tax. There is a lodging tax, which has a cap on it overall when you combine all sales taxes, and so that was recently reduced as of last fall. It's a 2.125%. We were at the legislature this year to get that back up to 3%, which is what was originally prescribed. We had that in the tax bill thanks to efforts of the IGR committee and its staff, but that was unfortunately part of the tax bill that was vetoed by the governor. So we still remain at the 2.125% lodging tax. There's an entertainment tax of 3%, which applies to a number of things, not just tickets, but in some cases larger hotels. 3% restaurant and liquor tax, which is only in the downtown area. So a couple of years ago, the host committee, when we were talking about some of these negotiations, had a consultant, it's the same consultant that you've heard about in the media, Rockport, that performed an analysis not just of a local economic impact, but we requested and the host committee agreed to have them focus just on the Minneapolis city taxes. And at that time, this was again before the reduction in the lodging tax, it was a 2.5% or $2.5 million projection on net city sales and entertainment taxes from this event. We anticipated that those funds would be transferred then to the general fund to help offset some of our regular expenses. As we know, the enterprise devoted a lot of time and energy, which were not just overtime costs, my time, certainly our IT department to support our public safety, a number of other folks that had time diverted away. And so it was the idea that that money then would, in addition to the reimbursements for the host committee, that would help offset some of the city's costs. And I think the city was not interested necessarily as an enterprise to make a big profit off of this event, but we certainly wanted to break even. And the good news I can bring to you today is that we actually had unadjusted a $2.8 million gross increase. This is a number that was calculated by our city staff. In fact, Mr. Winkelheg, who just gave the presentation, was very involved in this review, and we did work with the host committee also, but we independently verified those numbers ourselves, actually instigated that evaluation and verified those ourselves with Department of Revenue numbers. We did adjust that number by a couple of things. One is we would have expected natural inflation anyway on sales and entertainment taxes. And then the second is we adjusted it by the fact that we had this lower lodging tax, which occurred last fall. So the net adjusted is about $2.4 million when we take into account that there would have been inflation anyway. And we take into account that to equalize that projection, we anticipating that we would have had the previously authorized lodging tax. So with that, I would just say, as a general nature, those sales and entertainment taxes were across the board. It was kind of I mean, it wasn't an equal amount among all 5 taxes, but relatively equal amounts as we would expect. So I think the good news is that we met all projections from that standpoint. The other good news is that we had other revenues that the city did receive, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wirt just to review the Public Works revenues associated with that. And certainly at the end of this presentation, if there are additional clarifications or questions, we'd be happy to take them. All right.
Good afternoon, council members. John Wirtz, Director of Traffic and Parking Services. Mark indicated with the Super Bowl, there were a number of Public Works revenue items, and on the slide in front of you is an overview of 3 basic types of revenue. Part of this is lane use and obstruction permits. The second is on-street parking, and the third is off-street parking. The top half of this chart illustrates those services and charges that the Super Bowl host committee requested. So they wanted to obstruct a lane, they wanted to reserve a meter, they wanted to use a parking space, et cetera. And so those numbers reflect the revenues that were brought in specifically as requested by them. The bottom half of the chart really outlines the regular revenue in comparison. So if I take out of our system those spaces and those activities that the Super Bowl host committee requested, what is left in our system and how did it compare in that regards? We looked at these revenues as noted here over a 3-month or a 10-month comparison or 10-day comparison, respectively, and said how did they compare to previous years in the context of that. You will note that the lane use fees are reduced from the previous years, and the key element of that is during this time period for the Super Bowl, we actually put in a construction moratorium. So we were not allowing other private use or private development use of the public right-of-way, which normally generates revenue during that same time period. And so in that context, we, in this card, if you compare the upper portion to the lower portion, we netted out approximately $100,000 difference between the top area where we collected money from the host committee, but we did not collect from others in that regards in that loss. The bottom 2 areas there indicate that we have a slight increase in our on-street parking meter revenue, which is an addition, and then also the off-street revenue as we look at those 10-day periods in that regards. In totality, approximately a $1.2 million total difference of increase in revenue. I should note that there is some information in the RCA. There's a typo correction in there. Some of this revenue on this sheet includes revenue that was generated not specifically on behalf of the state for the ABC parking ramps, and so that's in there. And so the number in the RCA, which is stated at 1.1 million, is really $675,000, which comes directly to the city, where the rest of that would be going to the state for their share of parking in their ramps. So with that, those are my presentation materials for the Public Works revenue.
Any questions from my colleagues? Comments? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Jeff Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Minneapolis Convention Center. So the Minneapolis Convention Center hosted 2 events during the Super Bowl Experience and the Super Bowl Tailgate Party over that 10-day event days in January and February. Here's a picture of our super employees and contractors, and we really felt the impact of the Super Bowl personally, as did many others in the hospitality community. Collectively, we all worked very hard to accomplish a successful Super Bowl. The success was felt in both pride and the pocketbooks of our staff. The impact of the Super Bowl was personal to us. Because we hosted the Super Bowl, we were able to provide more opportunities for employment and growth. We hired a very diverse group of 20 additional staff to work an overnight shift from October of 2017 through the end of March 2018. And this really was to help us through the compressed schedule leading up to, throughout, and after the Super Bowl. We've already been able to hire permanently 3 of these 20 staff members, and we hope to hire more. 2 of our regular staff members took on the increased role and pay of leading these new hires on the overnight crew. And both of those staff members were given this opportunity, are part of demographics that we would really like to increase in our leadership. And so again, it gave them an opportunity to learn new skills and to grow as employees. And our staff worked long hours and walked a lot of miles. Just 3 of our staff walked a combined 212 miles over the 10 days. That's like walking to Fargo, North Dakota. Many accolades have been received for the hard work during the Super Bowl, including the city's North Star Award presented to our event operations manager, Kurt Hickok, for his leadership and operational plan during the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl had a direct, important financial impact to our employees, especially those employees who work on an hourly or part-time basis. Money received from the Super Bowl stayed in our community. Just as an example, our 7 full-time production techs worked very hard, but they also were rewarded with $53,000 more pay during this 14-day period than they made last year during that same 14-day period. Additionally, Local 13 IATSE members that were called off the bench received hours and pay significantly more than last year. These figures don't account for the hundreds of hours that were worked by IATSE members that were called off the bench for other events and by other people within even the convention center. Our partners and contractors help support our operations and our success. One partner, Kelber Catering, had impressive personal impacts during the Super Bowl. Almost 200 more people worked during this time frame than worked last year. The total number of hours that staff worked was 3 times higher than the same period last year, leading to an increase of $375,000 in union payroll. Again, all of this money stayed in our community. These numbers don't come easy. As one Kelber employee holds the MCC Fitbit challenge of over 63,000 steps or 31 miles of walking in one day during the Super Bowl. The convention center had historic overall gross revenues from the Super Bowl events at $2.3 million. These revenues were $1.3 million higher than our largest past event ever. For the month of February, the convention center ran at an all-time record operating profit of $1.1 million. And due to the compression of events, we are also currently running at an operating profit through the end of April financials. So I thought you'd also like some other fun facts to look at. I think my favorite here is that we sold over 100,000 tater tots as part of our tater tot hot dish purchases. So again, what greater way to pass on our culture to the world. And beyond the numbers, we know that our future business will be supported by the Super Bowl because visitors liked what they saw and said they would come back. Over 90% of visitors said they would return to Minneapolis. Our business leads, as tracked by Meet Minneapolis, were up 10% compared to the first quarter of 2017. This positive reaction to Minneapolis will continue to bring benefits for many years to come. The convention center is just one piece of the hospitality community, but we are the foundational engine that keeps Minneapolis's more than 36,000 hospitality employees working and the hospitality sales taxes compiling. Money from this event went directly to our staff and directly to our bottom line, which will help lessen our reliance on hospitality sales taxes. With that, I will pause and answer any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this presentation, Mr. Johnson. I'm curious, there are a lot of fun facts in these slides, but how do these figures compare with what we thought, what our projections were, what our expectations were? Did they generally exceed expectations? I don't think you had an expectation for a certain number of tater tots, but you know what I mean in general.
Chair Warsami, Councilmember Palmisano. It was hard for us to make a prediction on what revenues would come in for the event. Just knowing that our largest event ever had brought in revenues of $1 million. And so at this event at $2.3 million, we were all pretty blown away by the number when it came in. So definitely it exceeded our expectations for the amount of people that came through the building and for the expenses and revenues that we brought in.
And I appreciate that those revenues are hard figures. But in terms of things like the percentage of people that said they'd come back, or our quarter one leads for 2018, how do we assure the values of those numbers, or how did we sample it? I assume we didn't survey every single person that left, but can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Chair Warsami, Councilmember Palmisano, that was part of the Rockport information that was done as for the host committee, and they did do some level of surveying. One thing that we have found over time is that one of our hardest sells when we're looking to bring events into Minneapolis and into the convention center is to get them here, to have them see Minneapolis, because they may not have ever experienced Minneapolis or don't really have much to think about Minneapolis other than maybe some negative thoughts about weather or other things. And so what we have found is if we can get someone to Minneapolis, they are generally blown away and they can't believe how great the city is, how clean the city is, how much there is to do in the city. And so to me, that's what the Super Bowl has done for us. It has put the eyes on Minneapolis and allowed people to say, wow, I can't believe what a great city you have. And that's where this over 90% of visitors saying, yeah, I want to come back, really falls in line with what we've been seeing over time and what Meet Minneapolis has been seeing as they go out and talk about Minneapolis. If you can get someone here, they're blown away and they want to come back.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for this presentation. The TOTS number was fun, but, really being able to see the amount of work that humans put into all of this. A lot of times we see numbers and dollars, but we forget that it's humans who are behind all of that work. And so something as simple as how many steps people took, like that just really gives a solid vision. We talk so much about this high level event, but there were thousands of people who made it possible. And so thank you so much for taking the time to bring that humanity to the council and also make it fun. So we don't really get enough opportunities to be able to raise and praise employees who make all of these things possible. So thank you so much for bringing that today.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Warsami. Thanks for this presentation. I think that sometimes impact is hard to measure, and it's useful to have as many measurements as we can to sort of understand that in general, this seems to have been a good investment for us. One of the things that I'm very interested in as we think about events generally is thinking about looking at the impact for small businesses, looking at the ways that that this money gets to other folks. So one thing I want to lift up that wasn't in your presentation, but that I know happened over the course of the convention center work was that there was at least one big event where the convention center catering was bought out so that we could bring in a lot of small businesses to cater small pieces of that event. And so there were a lot of small businesses that got a little piece of the catering activity at the convention center, which I know is unusual and a little challenging. So it took some real work to pull off, and I really appreciate that. One of the things that obviously we hope is going to come out of this is additional business. That was one of the things that we talked about. And you mentioned in the Meet Minneapolis slide an increase in leads. And I guess I'm wondering, it's a little bit of a tough news day to be presenting Meet Minneapolis data, but I guess I am wondering if we've got anything a little more concrete about if any of those leads are converting, what kind of leads are those? Are those the kinds of business that we sort of have goals to be recruiting in terms of what's coming into the convention center? I'm curious now that we're like 6 months out, if we have a sense of things actually getting booked and on the calendar and coming in and bringing additional revenue.
Chair Warsami, Councilmember Fletcher. I know that during the Super Bowl, we had many clients in town. and many clients that came in that will hopefully be booked. We do track, and Meet Minneapolis does track their conversion rate, and generally their conversion rate is 28 to 29% of leads. I don't have the figures in front of me right now after the Super Bowl where it is, but that is definitely something that we will be tracking and can report on and see if there was a spike in the conversion rating, and which events or which clients we had in town during the Super Bowl, if they ended up signing or not. We can definitely get that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this item? Thank you. Thank you to all the staff. And I make a motion to receive and file this item. All in approval say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the item passes. And we have our final presentation, and this is item number 25, the 20-year Neighborhood Park Plan 2018 Annual Report. And we have some of our park staff members. So please introduce yourselves and let's get your presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Mary Merrill, the interim superintendent at the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Chair Wasami and council members, I'm so happy to be here. I'm proud to be here. I'm excited about this historic agreement that happened between the City Council and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to really look at the infrastructure of this city, which is really largely based on parks, and begin to repair that infrastructure. We've known about this deficit for a long time. When I was superintendent before, former Mayor Sharon Sells Belton, we worked on this issue and began to make some progress. We certainly didn't come anywhere near what you were able to do as a part of the NPP 20. But we're here today to say that generations before us really invested in our city, and they invested in our parks, and that has made us a #1 park system. Going forward into the future, we have to make those same investments to make our city the great city that it continues to be today. So with that, to try to give you some of this very specific information about what the report was, what we did, what it was based on, the information that we gathered in Closing the Gap report. First, I'm going to have Jennifer Ringgold come, who is the deputy superintendent, and she's going to present that information. And then Julie Wiseman, who is our finance director, will give you the numbers, which I'm sure you're most interested in this first annual report. And ultimately, Michael Schroeder will be coming to give you some updates on the projects and where we are with all of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Wasami, council members. Again, I'm Jennifer Ringgold. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. You should have in front of you, I hope, the actual annual report. So this will be the first of 20 times we will come and do this for you. Not this year, but over the next 20 years. Within there, you will find our executive summary, brief report on the 2015 Closing the Gap, some information on the critical ordinances that are the foundation of this work, where we've been in terms of planning and implementation. Look at the maintenance, the rehab, and the capital investments that are underway or have already occurred. And then the appendixes are quite robust and give you basically all of the legal documents and all of kind of the, if you want to see how each park is rated, for example, all of those documents are there for you. As Superintendent Merrill had indicated, this is a historic agreement between the city and the park board. We are very, very grateful for it. And it establishes funding for basically the next 20 years for neighborhood parks. This work followed after about a year's work of investigation. We had known that the infrastructure in our neighborhood parks was not keeping pace. So we spent some time to really look at each of those parks, look at the life cycle for each of the amenities within those parks. And I think what we discovered was even more surprising than what we had anticipated. We soon discovered that at the pace we were at, By 2020, 70% of our infrastructure in the neighborhood parks would be beyond its useful life. We also knew that by 2020 we would be $157 million behind, and if we continued that pace through 2040, we would be $461 million behind. So this was important, and we are deeply grateful for the relationship we have with you on this. That data at the time was compelling. City Council and the Park Board worked together. What we put in place was a joint ordinance that established the MPP 20 program for the next 20 years, which provides funding for our neighborhood infrastructure. It doesn't include programming or other types of pieces. It's really dedicated toward maintenance, rehab, and capital. We also, shortly after that, so in July of 2016, we established an ordinance that would articulate how those dollars got spent within the neighborhood parks. And that particular ordinance lays out, I'll talk about that in a minute, but specifically how those dollars would go towards parks that would have received less funding previously and might be in most need of funding today. Because of the agreement, we are able to begin reversing the years of underfunding for 160 neighborhood parks. We have actually protected current funding levels and really put a strong protection in for those additional funding levels that you have put forward. And it dedicates $11 million annually to maintenance, rehab, and capital. Every 5 years, we have the opportunity to work with you to adjust the rate so that dollar amount might change over time. As I mentioned, the way these dollars are allocated is a very data-driven approach. And in fact, if you were to look at the back of your report, you will begin to see a series of tables that articulate out basically the ratings of each park. There are 7 criteria. This is what it gets put forward in our ordinance that looks at how to allocate the dollars. And those 7 criteria look at allocation from areas of concentrated poverty, racially concentrated poverty, population density, youth density, and neighborhood safety, as well as information about the assets itself. And I think one of the most important aspects of the asset itself is it helps us, even if we've spent money in a park before, put it into proportion. So you can spend $400,000 in a park and maybe it only has a playground, and that basically solves that park's need. But if you put money into a park, say $400,000 in the park that's the size of North Commons, where you have millions of dollars of assets and their $400,000 doesn't actually do the same level of work. So it looks at that as well. The report, as Julie will talk about in a little bit more, and Mary had mentioned, is required. We need to come to you every year and tell you how we are doing. And that's a really important part of this. And this one covers 2016 to 2018. And the reason why it has 2016 in it is that you were kind enough to ensure we had a little bit of startup money. So you made sure we had a $1.5 million in startup dollars to get us started. And then 2018 looks forward to what we see coming this year. That startup money was used primarily to drill down in assessments. So while we knew on a large scale what needed to be done, we needed to start prioritizing and understanding what those assessments needed to be done, and allowed us to get staffing in place and get some of the equipment in place that we would need to do. Julie will talk in more detail about the rehab, the maintenance, and the capital aspects of it. But before I leave you, I wanted to just plant the seed that next year, one of the things you will start to see from us, you're anticipating, and we are anticipating, that by investing more in maintenance, rehab, and capital, that we will see a reduction in operating costs, right? Because there will be less immediate, unpredictable fixes that we have to do as an organization. So you would expect, as we would expect, to start to see some impacts that happen on an operating level. We don't have enough done yet for those data points to actually start showing up. We will start anticipating being able to show that to you next year. And with that, Director Wiseman will come up and talk more about the specific finances.
Council members, I'm Julie Wiseman. I'm the Finance Director for the Minneapolis Park Board. And I'm going to step you through some of the financials that you will find in the MPP 20 annual report. Again, this is a report on the financial side of what was accomplished in 2017 and then what is planned for 2018. On the MPP maintenance side, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board received $3 million. That was a property tax levy, and that was included in our 2017 Minneapolis Park Board General Fund property tax levy. Going forward, as a part of our budget process, we recommend a maximum property tax levy, and in December, we adopt the levy for the next year. So in 2018, we adopted that levy with a 4.2% increase. So in 2017, we had $3 million for maintenance. In 2018, we will have $3.1 million in maintenance. Our process for enhancing and increasing our maintenance practices is to analyze the current procedure, evaluate and develop a work plan, train and implement program changes, analyze the outcomes of those program changes, and then implement them going into the future. In 2017, we spent by the end of 2017 almost the full $3 million. It's about $20,000 shy of the $3 million. So we were able to utilize those funds in 2017. So really on the maintenance side, it's about increasing our service delivery. So there is a chart, which is actually on page 12 of your report, and I've shown this on the PowerPoint here. So for example, our 2016 service level for mowing was on average of 14 days. In 2017, as we phased in the additional increases for NPP 20, we were able to improve that service level down to 12 days. Our ultimate goal for mowing is to have an average 10-day mowing cycle, which we believe we will be able to hit in 2018 and then maintain throughout. So when you get into the capital improvement side, the Minneapolis Park Board adopts a capital improvement program just like the city of Minneapolis. We go through the CLIC process like the city of Minneapolis. And on the capital side, we historically or predate MPP 20 received about $2.5 million of net debt bonds. As part of the NPP 20 funding, we receive an additional $8 million for a total neighborhood capital program of $10.5 million. As a part of the ordinance, the city has discretion on where those dollars come from. The previous council adopted a 2018 budget that shows for the next 5 years that those will come from net debt bonding. But of course, the city council will be able to adjust and account for that during their budget process going forward as well. And again, as Deputy Superintendent Ringgold stated, within the ordinance, every 5 years, we will be looking at the capital program and negotiating between the park board and the city on any inflationary adjustments that need to be made to that amount. You'll see that our 6-year program between 2017 and 2022 is broken out between capital and rehabilitation. And on this chart, you'll see that the green section of the chart, which is rehabilitation, gradually gets smaller, and the blue part of the chart gradually gets larger. As with everything, with deferred maintenance of our capital infrastructure, there is much more rehab that needs to be done in the immediate first years to shore up buildings that will not get a large investment until later in the capital program. So that's why you see that larger investment in rehab in the beginning years. So for a rehabilitation program, our program goals are really to enhance safety, work through our ADA transition plan, meet critical codes and regulations, address the critical failures, and focus on park features that are in most need of repairs. The way we did that is we inventoried all the assets. Our startup money, a large portion of our startup money was used for consultant services, where they went out, for example, for roofs and did an assessment on all the neighborhood park roofs and determined which ones were in the most need for improvements. They ranked those assets based on their condition, and that's how they will be addressed going forward. One thing before I turn it over to Michael, one thing about rehabilitation too is that we budget by category in the rehabilitation area, but as we go into a park, if we determine that there's going to be work done in that particular park, we look at all rehabilitation categories at that time and try to make sure that we're only interrupting that building for at one time rather than several times over several years. So for example, if it's determined that a roof work is going to be done, we may look at what ADA improvements need to happen or what other general building or pathway improvements need to happen and try to do as many of them all at the same time.
I think I have a question from Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question on the park lighting component. Does the park board have a policy on dark sky friendly lighting? I know it's a huge issue for wildlife with 30% of mammals and 60% of invertebrates requiring darkness in order to basically live. And it's also, just for my colleagues to note, it's actually counterintuitive to what people think. They think that when buildings and streets are more well lit, that it actually reduces crimes, but studies have found the opposite, and data analysis has found the opposite, that it actually increases crime. And so it seems like an opportunity here to save costs, help wildlife, and have a positive impact on crime in the parks.
Chair Warsami, Council Member Johnson, and other council members, my name is Michael Schroeder. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Planning. And to address Council Member Johnson's questions, we do look for opportunities to implement dark skies as we go through the replacement process on lighting. If you've been around some of our regional parks, we have lights that cast, like the cube lights that disperse light kind of indiscriminately in every direction, and we have been in a process to replace those, and they are being replaced with dark sky compliant fixtures.
Great, that's wonderful, thank you.
So, council members, I will focus on the rehabilitation categories for just a second, then move into the progress we've been making on capital projects as well. And you'll note that as Director Wiseman framed, we have divided our rehabilitation dollars into several categories, some of which we're making significant progress in expending the dollars, and some are taking longer, in particular because the assessment process is taking us longer to move through. So if you look at this chart, the green is the amount that's been budgeted for a particular year. The blue is the amount that we've actually spent or directed towards projects in 2017. And if you look at like ADA, we're making significant progress across a number of issues to move closer to ADA. We actually have $800,000 a year for the first 5 years directed to that because we have significant improvements throughout the neighborhood park system that need to be made. When you look at the categories relating to roofs, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, and park lighting, we had significantly more assessment work that needed to be done. And as we moved into each one of those, we were finding our, for instance, in our recreation centers related to heating, ventilation, air conditioning, that it wasn't so simple as simply replacing a particular system. New systems require different electrical services. We have systems that are in ceilings where when we start to peel those off, we find we have problematic environmental conditions that need to be dealt with. So we are moving very directly through those processes, following up on really detailed assessments for each category. I'll also note that on the operations facility category, while we haven't spent a lot of money in that category in 2017, we did open a new service center in North Minneapolis at 4022.5 Washington but we were relying on past allocations from past dollars to accomplish that. And we'll be moving into other service centers. These are our operations centers, and making improvements in 2018 and going forward. Here's a more numerical breakdown of that. You can see that when we look at the categories relating to roofs, HVAC, and park lighting, our thresholds for expenditures are much lower, but we are, this is from 2017. We've actually made significant progress on the remaining projects in 2017 as we move through 2018. And as to refresh your memory on this, as Julie said, we're going through assessments. We're picking off the highest priority projects first, and we continue to move through those, and we'll continue to move through those projects where the greatest need has been identified. This is where we are, and so this is as of 2000, at the end of 2017. We had made a small amount of allocation of dollars under the ADA for 2018. If we were to give you the mid-year position on this, you'd see that we were significantly into issues related to heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and the general recreation center improvements. And this is the outline of improvements, the more detailed enumeration, and it shows that we're at 0, but that was at 12/31/2017. Now we're midway through the year. We've actually made significant progress on those projects as well. When we look at how we do capital improvements, we have a process that typically takes us 2 years. Many of you are aware that we've been moving through service area master plans in different parts of the city, and that sets the master plan. Our first step following the master plan as we move into a park is to verify the specific improvements with the community. So we have a scoping and community engagement process we move through, then a design process, and then implementation. And we're finding that process, as it has in the past, takes us 2 years to move through. We want to make certain that but we've always been interested in high engagement with the community. We want to perpetuate that even as we have these funds to make sure they're directed towards the improvements that the community wants to see. So in 2017, we had a little under $4 million of our $6 million allocation for capital accomplished, and it was divided across a number of projects. Some of the things that become important here is if you look on the column to the far right on the screen, there are several projects that are in the North Service Area Master Plan where we're waiting for that work to be completed so we can spend the dollars according to the needs across the service area. And so we'll be moving through those projects as we move into 2019 and get those projects completed. This list of projects is generated from the equity metrics that Jennifer talked about as we go through every year reanalyzing the neighborhood and park characteristics. And you'll see also, and based on the idea that we have a 2-year cycle to get projects completed, we're just over $1 million in the dollars that have been allocated for capital investments in 2018, and they would be attributed to these parks. You will note that there are some projects where we have completed work. Northeast Athletic Field Park those dollars have been allocated, and even significant projects that take dollars far beyond MPP 20 have been completed with the Phillips Aquatic Center. And I think with that, I will stand for questions with the rest of our team.
Council members, I'll just say that this report is also available on our website for the public. And our next steps is we will also be doing this presentation to the Board of Estimate and Taxation at the end of the month.
All right. Thank you very much. Councilmember Fletcher.
Hello.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. Our parks are such an important part of our city, and for many of us, especially living in the more dense areas of town, this is our backyard. This is our opportunity to get outside. So I really appreciate it. I use the parks daily. They're very, very important. I also really appreciate the data-driven approach to decision making. I think it's very important to make sure that we're thinking about equity, that we're thinking about where we need to make the biggest investments first. But I do think as we think about that, the good thing about data is that it sort of keeps us honest. And I think the bad thing about using a data-driven approach that way is that it can be missing context. And so I think it's important that as we think about the impact of our sort of data-driven investments, that we also just make sure that we're maintaining parks in a way that's consistent with the context that they're in. And I'll point out Gateway Park as maybe an example of one that doesn't feel like it's getting that attention. I think that's one that probably by the equity matrix, it's sort of surrounded by some luxury buildings that don't have a ton of kids in them. And so like a lot of the things that we measure about, is this a park that we should be prioritizing? It probably doesn't rise to the top. And it looks like it's ranked pretty low, but it's also probably the park that's seen by the most tourists as people are going in and out of downtown. It's sort of a real entry point to the downtown area. And it just looks pretty run down right now. It really, last time I went by, they hadn't even like mowed it in a long time. And it just looked like nobody was taking care of it at all. And so I want to kind of point that out as we're prioritizing to both think about the data, but also make sure that we're thinking about the context and keeping our city looking good in ways that might not be captured in the measurements that we've selected here.
We certainly can look at that. I hear what you're saying, but we really wanted to make sure in this report, as you know, that we were focusing on neighborhoods that often are neglected and have been neglected in the past. But at the same time, we're the #1 park system in the country, so we have to look nice when the visitors come. I understand. Is there anything, Michael, you want to?
Councilmember Fletcher, I would just add that we are making an improvement this year in Gateway Park. The fountain hasn't run for a number of years, and we're investing about $200,000 in the replacement of that pump, so the fountain will actually be operating at some point during this year.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion with my colleagues? Let me add a couple of things as somebody who worked on this MPP plan last term and who insisted on having the equity matrix, that I see a great deal of difference in terms of the investments and where they're going. In my ward, PV Park is getting a lot of attention, which it needs. Curry Park has some great plans coming in. Matthews Park, the Aquatic Center, the Phillips Community Center has already been completed. So a lot of things that we were talking about last time has already been done. So I'm very glad and I'm very happy that you came and presented this.
Thank you.
Our first annual report for 20 years.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'll keep my thoughts and give it to Councilmember Cunningham. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to actually, sorry, since it's the end of our first one, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the folks who made this possible. So
Absolutely.
Thank you to my predecessor, former Council President Barb Johnson, former Mayor Betsy Hodges, and my colleagues who are still here doing the work. I just wanted to make sure that we give praise where praise is due, because this was a huge lift for folks in this last term. So I just wanted to make sure that as somebody who inherited this plan, thank you very much to those who put all the work into it, and thank you for helping to carry it out.
Absolutely. There are certainly board members that were present at the park board that are no longer there that worked very, very hard on this. The former superintendent, Jay Miller, worked very, very hard. So we certainly want to give credit where credit is due, and there's a lot of credit to pass around. So, okay.
Councilmember Cunningham, let me ask you a question. I mean, this plan and this agreement that we have is basically just for the physical aspect of our parks.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about the other needs that we have in our parks in terms of the human needs and the programs,
the people side.
activities, the people side? Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Absolutely. What this program did, MPP 20, which I think is historic and wonderful, it looked like at the infrastructure, the building and maintenance of our system. What it was not able to do was to deal with the people side, the programs for youth, the programs for our seniors, programs for our disabled and other individuals. And so that is still a need. And we're looking at that, especially in light of, I don't know whether you saw the article in the Star Tribune recently about after school programming and how our young people really don't have that same opportunity that they had in the past. And so I'm very concerned. As we began this summer, we've had a little bit of a rough start to our summer. And I think some of it is because perhaps maybe we haven't invested in youth in the same way that we have in the past. So we're going to be looking at how we can begin to help that issue around it's in particular after school program and youth development issues at the park board. And certainly that'll be something that you'll be hearing about as time goes on. And we'll be sharing that information because I think the park board in those rec centers, because they're strategically located in every single neighborhood, are one of the most cost-effective ways and accessible ways to reach out to young people in our city. So yes, we will be coming to you, and we're very concerned in that area.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Merrill. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a timeline on when you expect to return back with recommendations or with what the plan is?
Well, just
for
as
that?
we go through the budget process, I don't know that we were planning, but if you're inviting us to come back, we will come back at any time. We're happy to come back and share that data with you. But as we go through the budget process, there'll be certain opportunities for us to share with the mayor, for instance, this week. And ultimately, we'll be coming back to you again at the end of the cycle to present our recommended budget. So.
Great, thank you. This is a huge concern as well, the programming aspect. In my ward, we have no youth development centers. Only spaces we have are parks. That's the only space that we have. And so this is a huge concern. I hear it all the time from constituents. We need more things for our kids to do. There's a lack of opportunities in my ward. You know, a lot of times, like when we talk about youth development in North Minneapolis, it gets pretty concentrated around North Commons. And so really wanting to make sure that we're going north of Lowry and providing resources, and then even north of the railroad tracks to make sure that all of North Minneapolis is getting access to programs, because the further north we go, the further removed we are. So just wanted to throw that out there and say thank you very much. And I would like to see them come back if that's cool, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm in total agreement with Councilmember Cunningham. We do need more after-school programs, youth development programs, especially in areas that have been neglected in the past. So I invite them. I invite you to meet both of us and to discuss this.
We'll work with you.
And I wanted to add as well that, you know, the park board has a lot of friends on the council. Many people care about, you know, so I can speak for my colleagues that we're very proud of our park board system that we have, and we want to make sure that we continue developing it. So I thank you again for this presentation and all the good work that you're doing. So thank you very much. So any further discussions, any questions? Okay, I move to receive and file this item. All in approval say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The item has been approved, and having concluded the business on our agenda for today, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.